What if I told you that the most powerful man in ancient Rome didn't conquer his way to the top through military might alone, but through a web of strategic relationships that would make modern politicians green with envy? Julius Caesar, the name that became synonymous with absolute power, didn't just stumble into greatness. He orchestrated one of history's most brilliant political campaigns, turning enemies into allies, lovers into political assets, and rivals into stepping stones. While most Romans were playing checkers, Caesar was playing 4D chess with human hearts and minds. From secret alliances that shocked the Senate to a legendary romance that changed the course of two empires, Caesar's rise wasn't just about battlefield victories. It was about mastering the ultimate weapon, people themselves. Today, we're diving deep into the relationships that built an empire and changed the world forever. This is how Caesar really conquered Rome. To understand how Caesar's relationships catapulted him to unprecedented power, we need to grasp the political landscape of late Republican Rome. The Roman Republic in the 1st century BC wasn't the stable democracy we might imagine. It was a cutthroat oligarchy where a handful of elite families controlled everything through a complex web of patronage, debt, and political maneuvering. Traditional paths to power required decades of climbing the cursus honorum, the ladder of political offices, while constantly navigating Senate politics dominated by conservative nobles who jealously guarded their privileges. Most ambitious Romans played by these rules and remained trapped within them. Caesar recognized that the system itself was the obstacle, and relationships were the key to transcending it entirely. In 60 BC, Caesar engineered what historians call the First Triumvirate, a clandestine political alliance that would reshape Roman history. But calling it merely an alliance undersells its revolutionary nature. Caesar had identified the two most powerful men in Rome who despised each other, Pompey the Great and Marcus Licinius Crassus. Pompey, Rome's greatest living general, had conquered the East and earned unprecedented military glory. Yet the Senate consistently blocked his attempts to secure land for his veterans and ratify his eastern settlements. Meanwhile, Crassus, Rome's richest man, commanded enormous financial resources but lacked the military prestige he craved. These two titans viewed each other as natural rivals, making any cooperation seemingly impossible. Caesar's masterstroke was recognizing that their rivalry was actually complementary weakness. He approached each man separately, offering what the other couldn't provide. To Pompey, he promised political backing for his veteran settlements and eastern arrangements. To Crassus, he offered opportunities for lucrative military commands and political advancement. Most crucially, Caesar positioned himself as the essential mediator, the only man both would trust to keep their bargain. The alliance was formalized through marriage. Caesar's daughter Julia wed Pompey, creating a family bond that strengthened political ties. This wasn't just symbolic. In Roman culture, marriage alliances carried profound obligations and expectations. Pompey genuinely loved Julia, which gave Caesar significant leverage over Rome's greatest general. The immediate results were staggering. Caesar secured his consulship for 59 BC and, more importantly, command of Gaul for an unprecedented 5 years. This governorship provided him with legions, wealth, and the opportunity to build his own military reputation. Without the triumvirate, Caesar would have remained just another ambitious senator. With it, he became a power player capable of challenging Rome itself. Caesar's relationship with Cleopatra VII of Egypt represents perhaps history's most famous example of romance intertwining with geopolitics. When Caesar arrived in Alexandria in 48 BC pursuing Pompey, he encountered a pharaoh fighting for her throne against her brother Ptolemy XIII. What happened next wasn't just a love affair. It was a calculated political masterstroke by two of history's most brilliant leaders. Cleopatra was far from the exotic seductress of popular imagination. She was a highly educated, multilingual ruler who spoke at least 9 languages and was the first Ptolemaic pharaoh to learn Egyptian. She understood that Egypt's independence depended on aligning with Rome's ultimate victor. Caesar, meanwhile, recognized that controlling Egypt meant controlling Rome's grain supply and accessing virtually unlimited wealth. Their alliance delivered concrete benefits to both parties. Caesar gained Egypt's vast resources to fund his civil war against Pompey and the Senate. Egyptian wealth paid his legions and funded his political campaigns back in Rome. He also gained a secure base of operations in the eastern Mediterranean and access to Alexandria's scholars and scientists, who contributed to his later calendar reforms. For Cleopatra, the relationship secured her throne and Egypt's independence. Caesar's military support eliminated her rivals and established her as undisputed pharaoh. Their son Caesarion, whether actually Caesar's child or not, represented the potential unification of Roman and Egyptian power. Even after Caesar's assassination, Cleopatra successfully leveraged their relationship's legacy in her later alliance with Mark Antony. Historical evidence suggests their relationship was genuinely affectionate, but both leaders were too sophisticated to let emotion override political calculation. Caesar spent months in Alexandria when he should have been consolidating power in Rome, a decision that only makes sense if Egypt's strategic value justified the political risk. Caesar's relationship with Mark Antony exemplifies his genius for inspiring fierce personal loyalty. Antony wasn't just a subordinate, he was Caesar's chosen political heir and most trusted lieutenant. Their bond was forged through shared military campaigns, political struggles, and personal friendship that transcended typical patron-client relationships. Antony served as Caesar's master of horse during his dictatorship and proved absolutely crucial during the Ides of March crisis. On the day of Caesar's assassination, Antony was supposed to accompany Caesar to the Senate. When warned of danger, Antony was detained by conspirator Brutus Albinus, probably saving his life and ensuring Caesar's legacy would survive. After the assassination, Antony's loyalty to Caesar drove his actions for the rest of his life. His famous funeral oration, immortalized by Shakespeare but historically documented by Plutarch and Cassius Dio, turned Roman public opinion against the conspirators and sparked the civil wars that would destroy the Republic. Antony's emotional connection to Caesar motivated his relentless pursuit of the assassins and his eventual alliance with Caesar's adopted son Octavian. But Caesar cultivated loyalty throughout his organization, not just with prominent figures. His centurions and soldiers displayed unprecedented devotion, willing to march on Rome itself for their commander. This loyalty stemmed from Caesar's personal attention to his men. He knew their names, shared their dangers, and ensured they profited from their service. Roman historians noted that Caesar's legions fought harder and took greater risks than typical Roman armies, reflecting their commanders' relationship-building skills. Perhaps Caesar's most sophisticated relationship skill was his ability to transform opponents into supporters. Unlike many Roman leaders who destroyed their enemies, Caesar consistently offered reconciliation and advancement to those who opposed him. This clementia Caesaris, Caesar's mercy, wasn't mere magnanimity, it was calculated political strategy. After defeating Pompey in civil war, Caesar pardoned many Pompeian supporters and welcomed them into his administration. Marcus Junius Brutus, who would later assassinate him, was one such pardoned enemy. Caesar even appointed former opponents to important positions, demonstrating that switching sides carried rewards rather than punishment. This policy created a dilemma for Caesar's enemies. Continued opposition meant facing his military might, while submission offered advancement and forgiveness. Many chose submission, weakening the anti-Caesar coalition and strengthening his position. Even those who remained opposed had to consider whether their allies might defect, creating paranoia and instability in enemy ranks. Caesar's approach contrasted sharply with traditional Roman practice. Sulla's proscriptions in the 80s BC had demonstrated the dangers of mass executions. They created lasting hatred and instability. Caesar learned from this example, choosing integration over elimination. This strategy worked so well that many Romans genuinely mourned his assassination, viewing it as the murder of a merciful leader rather than the elimination of a tyrant. The marriage between Caesar's daughter Julia and Pompey in 59 BC demonstrates Caesar's sophisticated understanding of Roman marriage politics. This wasn't a simple political arrangement. It created genuine emotional bonds that influenced major political decisions for years. Julia was Caesar's only legitimate child, making this marriage a significant personal sacrifice that showed his commitment to the triumvirate. Pompey, despite being significantly older, genuinely fell in love with Julia. Roman historians record that he spent unusual amounts of time at home with her, neglecting his political duties in ways that frustrated his supporters. The marriage's success created unexpected problems for Caesar's enemies. They couldn't attack Caesar without implicitly attacking Pompey's beloved wife's father. When Julia died in childbirth in 54 BC, the emotional bond holding Caesar and Pompey together snapped. Historians mark her death as the beginning of the end for the First Triumvirate, and the start of the civil war that would destroy the Republic. This demonstrates both the power and fragility of Caesar's relationship-based strategy. Personal connections could transcend political differences, but they also created vulnerabilities that his enemies could exploit. Caesar's relationship with Marcus Licinius Crassus illustrates how he leveraged financial connections for political advancement. Crassus was legendarily wealthy. His fortune came from real estate speculation, slave-worked mines, and money lending. But wealth alone couldn't buy the military glory that Romans prized above all else. Caesar offered Crassus something money couldn't purchase: military opportunities and political advancement. Through the triumvirate, Crassus secured command in the east against Parthia, seeking the military victories that had eluded him throughout his career. In exchange, Crassus provided crucial financial backing for Caesar's political campaigns and military expenses. This relationship was purely transactional, unlike Caesar's emotional bonds with figures like Antony or his strategic romance with Cleopatra. But it was no less important. Roman politics required enormous financial resources. Candidates had to provide games, bribes, and public works to win elections. Without Crassus's wealth, Caesar couldn't have competed with other aristocratic families who had inherited fortunes. When Crassus died fighting the Parthians in 53 BC, his death removed another stabilizing force from Roman politics. The triumvirate couldn't survive the loss of both Julia and Crassus, leaving Caesar and Pompey to face each other without intermediaries. Understanding Caesar's relationships requires recognizing his exceptional charismatic qualities. Ancient sources consistently describe Caesar as personally magnetic. People wanted to be around him, to gain his approval, and to serve his cause. This wasn't accidental. Caesar cultivated his persona as carefully as his political alliances. Caesar's charisma manifested in several ways. He was famous for his speaking ability. Cicero, Rome's greatest orator, acknowledged Caesar as his only rival in eloquence. Caesar used this skill not just for public speeches but for private conversations where he could convince individuals to join his cause. He also demonstrated remarkable memory for personal details. Roman sources record that Caesar remembered the names and histories of thousands of soldiers, citizens, and political figures. This personal attention made people feel valued and created emotional connections that transcended pure political calculation. Most importantly, Caesar projected absolute confidence in his destiny. He convinced others that supporting him meant backing a winner, that his success was inevitable rather than merely possible. This confidence became self-fulfilling as more people joined what they perceived as the winning side. Caesar's genius lay not just in individual relationships, but in creating network effects where his various connections reinforced each other. The first triumvirate worked because each member brought different supporters and resources, creating a coalition far stronger than any individual component. Similarly, Caesar's military relationships supported his political ones. Veterans who had served under Caesar became political supporters in Rome, while his political allies provided resources for further military campaigns. His relationship with Cleopatra strengthened both his Eastern political connections and his financial position, which supported his relationships with supporters in Rome. This interconnected web of relationships created resilience. When individual connections failed or individuals died, other relationships could compensate. Even after Caesar's assassination, the network he had built continued operating through figures like Antony, and eventually Octavian, who inherited both Caesar's name and many of his relationships. Ironically, Caesar's greatest strength, his ability to build relationships and inspire loyalty, also created his ultimate vulnerability. His policy of clementia and his willingness to work with former enemies eventually led to his assassination by men he had trusted and promoted. The conspiracy against Caesar included numerous individuals who had benefited from his mercy and advancement. Brutus, whom Caesar had pardoned and promoted, struck the fatal blow. Cassius had been praetor under Caesar's regime. Many of the conspirators had received positions, honors, and forgiveness from the man they murdered. This wasn't simply ingratitude, it reflected the tension in Caesar's approach. By forgiving his enemies, he demonstrated strength and magnanimity, winning over many supporters. But he also allowed potential threats to remain close to power, creating opportunities for betrayal that more ruthless leaders would have eliminated. The assassination succeeded precisely because Caesar trusted his relationships so completely. He dismissed warnings about the Ides of March and ignored omens that might have kept him away from the Senate. His confidence in his ability to manage human relationships ultimately proved fatal. Caesar's story proves that relationships aren't just personal, they're the ultimate strategic weapon. Whether you're building a business, advancing your career, or leading a team, the principles that built an empire 2,000 years ago still work today. Identify complementary strengths, offer mutual value, cultivate genuine loyalty, and turn opponents into allies. But remember Caesar's fatal lesson: even the best relationships require constant attention and can't replace good judgment about who to trust. Want to dive deeper into history's greatest political strategists? Subscribe and hit that notification bell. Next week, we're exploring how Cleopatra used relationships to keep Egypt independent for nearly 2 decades after Caesar's death. Drop a comment about which historical relationship builder you want to see next. And if this video changed how you think about networking and influence, share it with someone who needs to level up their relationship game. Sometimes the oldest strategies are still the most powerful ones. Like this video if Caesar's political genius blew your mind.